My name is Leo, I'm 31, and on the day my father's will was read, my stepmother Catherine stared directly at me and said, "Well, it seems some dreams just aren't meant to be, are they, sport?" She was alluding to the lake house, the very one my own father had designed before my mother passed away when I was 12. It was the place where I had spent every summer of my life, where my dad had painted landscapes on the expansive deck, where he showed me how to name every bird that made its home in the towering maples. The house that was supposed to be mine. Instead, ownership passed to Catherine's daughter, Brianna, my 23-year-old stepsister, who had been there a grand total of 2 times in the 8 years since my father remarried. Brianna, who referred to it as that stuffy old cabin, and griped about the poor cell signal. I sat there in the lawyer's office, my hands clasped in my lap like the dutiful son I had always strived to be, and I watched Catherine's grin broaden as the legal proceedings continued. The family business, Dad's construction firm that I had essentially managed for the last 3 years, was to be divided between Catherine and Brianna. The investment portfolios, the stock holdings, even my father's collection of classic watches that he had promised me, were all now Catherine's. "There must be some kind of error," I said softly. "No error," Catherine answered, her voice syrupy sweet. "Your father made his wishes perfectly clear. He wanted to ensure his true family was looked after." Those words felt like a physical strike. True family. As if 18 years as his son, of laboring late into the night at the firm, of gripping his hand during chemotherapy, of being the one to arrange his memorial service while Catherine was too overwhelmed by grief to lift a finger, as if all of that didn't make me real. I departed from that office with precisely what Catherine had always planned for me to receive: absolutely nothing. However, she made a single vital miscalculation. She operated under the assumption that I was the same shattered young boy who had wept himself to sleep when my father first introduced her. She presumed I was still the adolescent who had tried so desperately to earn her validation, who had held his tongue through countless years of her subtle cruelties and calculated exclusions. Catherine had no inkling of the man I had become. The very first thing I did was place a call to my mentor, Marcus Thorne, the man who had guided me through my MBA program at Stanford. Marcus, who was now at the helm of one of the most prosperous private equity firms on the West Coast. "I need a position," I told him, "and I need to get off the grid for a bit." "What's going on with the family business?" "It's a long story." A moment of silence passed. Marcus had known me for 6 years. He had witnessed me presenting to boardrooms filled with executives twice my age and watched me close deals valued in the millions. He was well aware that I did not ask for assistance without good reason. "When can you be here?" Within a fortnight, I was in San Francisco working from Marcus's high-rise office, putting into practice everything I had absorbed, not just from my MBA, but from 8 years of observing my father build his company from scratch. Only now, instead of overseeing building projects, I was orchestrating corporate acquisitions. I immersed myself in my work with a ferocity that can only stem from having nothing left to lose. 18-hour workdays became my standard. I learned to interpret financial statements with the same fluency that my dad had taught me to find structural weaknesses in architectural plans. "You're developing a killer instinct," Marcus remarked one evening as we looked over a particularly bold takeover proposal I had put together. "Good," was all I said. For 2 years, I had no contact with Catherine or Brianna. I gathered from mutual friends that the construction firm was facing difficulties. It appeared that losing the individual who managed most of the key client accounts and project logistics had some negative effects. Who would have guessed? I learned that Brianna had taken possession of the lake house but was seldom there, preferring her condo in Denver. I learned that Catherine had begun securing loans using Dad's life insurance policy as collateral. I heard it all, and I stored every piece of information away. Then the call that altered the course of everything arrived. "Leo, The voice was hesitant and frail. It took me a second to realize it was Brianna. "This is a surprise," I said. Listen, I know things between us have been strained, but I have to ask you about the company." I remained silent, waiting. "We're in trouble. I mean, serious trouble. Catherine has been trying to manage everything, but she just doesn't get the business. And I'm still in college, and—" Her voice faded. "We could lose it all." "I'm sorry to hear that, Brianna. Please. I know you're upset about the will, but Dad would never have wanted the firm to go under. You know he wouldn't have." She was correct. Dad had poured 30 years of his life into building that business from the ground up. It was his legacy, his source of pride. The idea of it turning to dust should have shattered me. Instead, I experienced an entirely different emotion, opportunity. "Send me the company's financial records," I said. The figures were even more dire than I had anticipated. They were losing money at an alarming rate, had lost 3 key clients, and were being sued by a subcontractor for non-payment. The company that once had 15 employees was now down to 6, and by my calculations, they would be insolvent within half a year. I took a week to formulate my proposal. Then I called Brianna again. "I have a plan," I informed her, "but you're not going to like it." We convened at a cafe close to the campus where Brianna was completing her final year. She appeared haggard, looking older than her 25 years. The privileged young woman who had been handed everything had been supplanted by someone who was learning what it felt like to lose. "I can save the company," I stated directly. "I have the financial backing, the industry contacts, and of course the know-how. But I don't work for nothing. What's your price?" "A controlling interest. 60%. Brianna's face turned pale. "Leo, I can't. Catherine would never agree. Catherine is out of options. You can either sell to me or you can stand by and watch 30 years of Dad's life's work vanish. That's the choice." I pushed a manila folder across the table. "This is my offer. It's equitable. More than equitable, given the situation. You and Catherine will keep 40% ownership and can remain as consultants. The company is saved, the staff keeps their jobs, and Dad's legacy is preserved." Brianna opened the folder, her hands shaking. I had been generous in my valuation, offering almost twice the company's current worth. It was a lifeline, a fact we both understood. "I have to speak with Catherine," she said. "You have 48 hours. The call came 36 hours later. Catherine's voice was a barely contained tempest of ice-cold rage. "You calculating? This was your end game from the start, wasn't it?" "Actually, no," I replied truthfully. "My end game was to forge my own path and never give any of you another thought. But your mismanagement of Dad's company forced my involvement." We're not selling? Then you're declaring bankruptcy. The lawsuit alone will sink you." There was a protracted silence. I could almost hear the gears turning in Catherine's head as she desperately sought another way out, another play. But I had dedicated 2 years to learning how to see every angle, to foresee every possible maneuver. 51%, she finally uttered. 60. 55. "Catherine," my tone was soft, almost sympathetic. "This is not a negotiation. This is me offering to rescue something Dad cherished. Take the offer or leave it." The documents were signed on a Thursday morning in November, precisely 3 years after my father's memorial service. I strode into the boardroom where Catherine and Brianna were seated with their attorney, their expressions funereal. "Thank you for joining me," I said, claiming my place at the head of the table in Dad's old chair, the one Catherine had appropriated for herself. The signing was over in less than an hour. Once it was finished, Catherine rose to her feet, her face a rigid mask of fury. "You think you've won," she stated. I looked up at her, this woman who had dedicated 8 years to making me feel like an interloper in my own home, who had turned my grieving father against his own son, who had branded me a liar when I tried to tell Dad how she treated me when he wasn't there. "Catherine," I said gently, "I stopped caring about winning the day you told a 12-year-old boy that his deceased mother wasn't anything special. I started caring about survival, and now I care about honoring my father's memory by ensuring his life's work doesn't perish because your pride wouldn't let you admit you were out of your depth. I stood and straightened my jacket. But since you mentioned it, yes, I did win. I won the second I understood that I didn't need your blessing or your money to become the man I was always supposed to be. I glanced at Brianna, who had been quiet throughout the confrontation. I'll see you Monday morning. We have a business to turn around. As I made my way to the door, Catherine's voice followed me. Your father would be ashamed of you. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. For a fleeting second, I was 12 years old again, crying in my room because Catherine had accidentally sold my mother's hope chest at a yard sale. For a moment, that old familiar pang of self-doubt returned. Then I thought of the employees who would still have jobs next month because of my actions. I thought of the clients who had reached out to me personally, saying they wanted to bring their business back to the firm now that I was in charge. I thought of the new buildings that would be constructed from plans on paper because I had refused to let my father's legacy die. Maybe, I said, not turning back, but my mother would be proud. 6 months later, the firm was turning a profit again. A year after that, we secured a contract to design a new performing arts center, the most significant project in the firm's history. I rehired every employee Catherine had let go and brought on 5 new ones. I kept the lake house, not because I purchased it from Brianna, although I could have, and not through any manipulation or scheme to gain ownership. It was because Brianna, after a year of working under my direction, after learning the value of earning something instead of inheriting it, and after discovering her own knack for project management, approached me one evening in December with her own proposal. I want to give you something, she said, setting a legal deed on my desk. Brianna, let me finish. I've been thinking about what you said at the cafe about Dad's legacy. The lake house is more than just a structure. It's where your mother lived, where she and Dad dreamed, where they planned the life you would all have. Catherine was wrong to take it from you. Yeah, I was wrong to go along with it. I looked down at the deed, my eyes beginning to well up. Besides, Brianna added with a faint smile, I never really liked the drive out to the lake anyway. I found a great apartment downtown, close enough to walk to the office. That summer, I spent my first weekend at the lake house in 4 years. I sat on the expansive deck where my dad had painted his landscapes, observing the same birds he had taught me to name, feeling his spirit in every plank of wood and ray of sunshine. Catherine never contacted me again. I heard she relocated to Florida to live near her sister. I sometimes reflect on whether she ever grasped that the true inheritance my father gave me wasn't in the form of cash, or real estate, or even his company. It was the realization that I was powerful enough to create my own legacy, with or without his endorsement, and astute enough to distinguish between justice and vengeance. The lake house still carries the faint scent of my dad's cherry pipe tobacco. I imagine he would have appreciated the profound irony of it all. How the son Catherine worked so hard to marginalize ultimately became the one who saved everything he held dear. At times, the greatest victory is to simply refuse to be made small, regardless of how intensely someone tries to diminish you. At times, it's about creating something so resilient and fine that those who once looked down on you have no choice but to stand back and admire your work. And sometimes, if you are truly fortunate, it is about returning to the one place where you always belonged,